Senator Durbin.
Thank you very much, Chairman Graham, and I want to thank our two witnesses for joining us today. And let me say, by way of preface to these remarks, that as I'm sure you would not question the commitment of Congress, the House, and the Senate to the security of the United States, we certainly don't question your individual commitment nor the commitment of the fine men and women who work in your agencies. You are truly on the front line of protecting this great nation, and many of your colleagues risk their lives every single day in that pursuit. We should never minimize that, nor ignore it in any of these hearings. And I think we should make a point of saying that the purpose of this joint inquiry is not only to raise questions about your agencies and the intelligence community and the law enforcement community across America, but to raise questions about Congress itself. What is it that we did or failed to do that might have had an impact on September 11th, 2001? Some of these will be hard and embarrassing questions, but they have to be asked and answered. At times, judgments are made, and in retrospect, they may not have been proper. The same can be said of Congress, as can be said of your agencies, and I think it's those judgments that we are exploring in the course of these hearings. So I hope with that caveat and with that understanding that you'll bear with me as I ask a few questions that will try to get into some detail about issues which still remain unresolved in my own mind. There's so much of this that we are discussing that is subjective. Decisions made by men and women at a given time in history based on information they have before them, based on what they believe to be a threat to the United States and what they believe we should do to respond. There are some things, though, that are objective, and I think we should start there because I think, Mr. Black, that's where your testimony started. And the objective element here relates to the number of personnel who were dedicated to the war against al-Qaeda, a war declared in December of 1998 by DCI George Tenet. In a closed hearing on September 12, 2002, Mr. Black, you testified about not having enough people in CTC. In a public hearing on September 20th, we heard from a CIA officer who talked about, quote, misses that happen when people, even very competent, dedicated people, are simply overwhelmed, close quote, by their workload. Then, shortly thereafter, a press release was issued by the Central Intelligence Agency. This press release of September 19, 2002, really raised a question as to whether or not the joint inquiry was correct in saying that the CIA was inadequately staffed to meet this challenge. I guess the nature of my first question to you relates to these staffing levels. And I'd like if you would clarify at this point, if you can, first, did you, Mr. Black, play any role in the preparation of that September 19th, 2002 press release by the CIA?
No, I did not. Press business is not my fare.
So you weren't called on to provide information about facts or experiences that related to their...
I believe that information came from the Counterterrorism Center. As I did testify, I left the Counterterrorism Center in May.
All right.
And there's a new chief, and I'm confident that this information came from there.
Let me ask you this. The CIA press statement indicates that prior to September 11, 2001, there were 115 analysts throughout the CIA working terrorism-related issues. You said before our committee earlier that the CTC didn't have enough people. I really have to ask you which version we should stand by.
Right.
Your conclusion or the conclusion of the CIA press release?
Unfortunately, my view, probably both. There is a difference between the analysts that are assigned within CTC as well as analysts that are outside CTC and other components in the CIA that do provide analytical support. If you're looking at things such as a specific terrorist equipment or sort of regional analysis of terrorist trends, things like that, these personnel spend a considerable amount of their time on counterterrorism issues. So I will say this is a dangerous area. Counterterrorism Center does specifically and only counterterrorism. There's a tremendous amount of support to this effort that comes from outside, and we work generally through others.
The CIA press statement referenced to 115 analysts. Is it fair for me to conclude from what you've just said that that does not mean full-time analysts dedicated to this war against al-Qaeda?
I have not read the press release, And we use analysts in a lot of different ways. And I would have to check and look at the numbers. I'm not familiar with it. We have our analytical personnel do a lot of things. They do operational support, they do targeting, they do only analytical work. So I would have to check, and I'd have to take that for the record and get back to you.
Thank you. I wish you would. And also the CIA press statement says that the CIA special UBL unit tasked and directed 200 agency offices worldwide to work the counterterrorism target. Same question applies. How many of these were really full-time dedicated people working on it? How many of them may have been tasked to do only part of their work related to UBL? So if you would be kind enough to provide that information as well. You also raised in your opening statement a question about cash resources, and I read it carefully, just having been given it this morning, but I read it carefully, and it indicated, I think, some serious problems that you faced when you became chief in 1999, which resulted in an effort to cut subordinate units, except one, at least 30%. Let me ask you this question. This committee prepared the fiscal year 2002 authorization bill last summer in 2001, prior to September 11th, 2001. We were told that the CIA had excess money for counterterrorism left over from a supplemental appropriation. The CIA explained that they did not intend to spend that money in fiscal year 2002, but wanted to hold it for use at some future time. Are you able to testify as to whether or not there was excess money unspent on counterterrorism during that period of time before September 11th, 2001?
No, frankly, I don't recall. This is a very complex issue. It's 3 years. Generally, if there is money at the end of the year, it becomes an issue of what to do with it. I do not recall ever having excess funds that I was, of which I had control. That was excess. We were generally, we're always looking for more money to keep our machine going.
Thank you for that. Let me address, if I can, the issue that's been raised about the cooperation between your two agencies, the CIA and the FBI. One of the questions relates to this now famous June 11th, 2001 meeting, which you've made reference to, Mr. Black, in your testimony, and you allowed as to how the FBI presented photos at that meeting for the CIA to consider. The Joint Inquiry Staff statement noted that a CIA analyst who attended that meeting of CIA and FBI personnel would not share information with the CIA unless he was specifically authorized to do so, when in fact that was the purpose of the meeting, to share information. Why wouldn't a CIA analyst be more forthcoming with information of value to the FBI? Is this analyst attitude typical of personnel at your agency or the relationship with the FBI?
It could not be. First of all, I don't believe this happened. The CIA is in the business of collecting and disseminating intelligence. And in this case, the CIA analyst had been briefed that it was the laws and regulations of the land that prevented this information being passed over to a criminal bureau agent. And I'd have to defer to Mr. Watson on the difference between intelligence and criminal matters inside the FBI, but the guidance, as I understand it, comes from the FBI.
I need for you to clarify your answer. First, you said you didn't believe it happened, and second, you believe that if it happened, it was because of laws and rules that prohibited the exchange of information. Which conclusion are you giving us?
What I'm saying is that the CIA analyst from CTC was told that by the FBI, was told that this was an intelligence matter and that the criminal people should not be tainted by this because there could be prosecution involved.
That certainly raises, I think, an interesting policy question, which we have circled so many times in the course of this joint inquiry, about whether existing laws, policies, or let me just say the culture of different agencies creates obstacles to the sharing of information necessary for national security. Mr. Watson, one of the things that came to our attention with the arrest of Mr. Moussaoui in Minneapolis was the statement by the FBI agent that because of her frustration in dealing with FBI headquarters, she decided to take a bold and somewhat dangerous move by suggesting that the CIA be contacted directly so that information could be found about his background, Moussaoui's background, to justify arrest and detainment. Are you aware of that statement by the FBI agent that's been given to this committee?
I know this is pending prosecution, so I'll be very limited, but I'll try my best to answer that question. What you have in a situation like that, without being absolutely specific about it, is that this relationship with the CIA that we have is top-down driven. There are always, and it doesn't matter what program you're looking at, there are always bumps in the road. But the value is that you can get it to the top. And there's confusion about what can be shared and what can't be shared, what's taken out for FISA or what's developed in a criminal case. I'm not sure that everybody understands all those rules. But if it's a hindrance, they certainly have the opportunity to raise that up to the highest levels of the FBI. And if someone would have told me that, or if someone would have called Cofer about any of these problems, particularly the Moussaoui deal or whatever, then those matters would have been resolved. Now, I don't know if that was your specific question about Moussaoui or not, but
Well,
I'll come back on that.
I understand what you're saying,
Okay.
and frankly, that is a solution. It has to start at the top.
That's right. And if it's not top-driven, it's not going to work.
But the most important element is that it reaches the bottom so that the agent in the district office understands what his or her authority is and how far they can go in cooperation with other agencies.
If you look at, though, post-98 and what we were trying to do in building capacity, one of the criteria for the Minneapolis office is, do you meet with your NR counterparts on a regular basis? Do you have a working group with all your federal folks about counterterrorism? And so if there's an inference there, oh, who are these people in Minnesota from the CIA? That's their problem, and that's a performance issue that has to be addressed from my perspective. And that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you. Let me move from staff performance to the performance of technology. I have paid close attention now for over a year to what I consider to be the sad state of technology in your agency. I don't know who has to shoulder that responsibility for the current state of affairs, but it is a fact. And testimony that we received here, as well as in the Judiciary Committee, suggests that information technology is primitive in the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It is improving because of the Trilogy Project and others. But let me ask you, specifically, Mr. Watson, if we can overcome any cultural obstacles to sharing information, how close are we to the point where we actually have computers in communication? I mean, we have received testimony, for example, at a hearing on Tuesday. The FBI confirmed that there are currently 68,000 outstanding or unassigned counterterrorism-related leads at the FBI dating back to 1995. How much of this is attributable to the current state of FBI's information technology? Let me also add, at the same hearing, an agent stated that due to technological limitations, there are probably, in his words, hundreds of communications with his name on it that he's never seen. Tell me, how bad is it, and how much of an obstacle is this to really winning this war on terrorism?
I think that's a fair question. I think some of those numbers there are a little distorted. I probably need to clarify that. From a technological standpoint, I'm not a technocrat. What I am is an operator, and we have been very specific about what technology we need to fight the war on terrorism. I can't address exactly, do we need this type of device or technology? I think we're moving in that direction. Do we have that capability? We recognize we did not have that capability way back even before 1998.
Do you currently have the capability?
To do what?
To deal with terrorism with the most modern information technology
With the most
available?
modern, the answer is no.
And how far away is the FBI from having at its beck and call the information technology resources which will make us effective in dealing with law enforcement on the war on terrorism?
If you're asking me for a timeline for the Trilogy Project, I do not know the answer to that. I know money's been appropriated for it. I know we're moving as fast as we can in that direction. Is it a problem for us? Has it been? You're absolutely right.
I can tell you that before the Judiciary Committee, the person who is in charge of this now tells us that she is hopeful that by mid-2004 we will reach that point. That, I think, is a sobering analysis of the lack of progress at your agency. And I have tried mightily, even in the Department of Homeland Security bill currently pending on the floor, to make this a higher priority. once we have the right culture, once we have the dedicated men and women, for goodness sakes, they need the weapons in their arsenal to fight. And the FBI now has one hand tied behind its back, and it's using primitive equipment. Let me give you, or at least ask you a question related to the same thing. When the FBI receives new names during the course of terrorism investigation, it's standard practice to run the names through your database to determine whether there's any information about the individual. Arabic names are often spelled many different ways in English. I've seen that in the press. Given the state of the FBI's information system, what kind of problems does this present for the FBI in the war on terrorism?
The spelling of the names and the ability to run data in there.
Word search.
Do we have, a good answer to that is to say, do we have an analytical software on top of our ACS database? The answer is no. Is that technology available off the shelf? Yes, it is. And I don't want to, and I'm not smart enough on the trilogy issue to talk about that. But our information sharing project in St. Louis is exactly that. We take all the Illinois State Police records, we take all the St. Louis Police records, we take our data and load it in there. And then if we have a bit of information that says tattoo on left arm, it can immediately read those documents, and it's not a point-and-click system where you get 1,000 documents Xerox back or you have to go look at them. It analyzes those documents. It is a tremendous weapon, and I hope we get there. And I hope we get there before '04.
It's a weapon that is available from most computer
I
stores
should
in
not have
America.
said probably that it's off-the-shelf stuff, but I know what we're trying to utilize in St. Louis, and I don't know the security aspects of how to protect that. I mean, there are probably reasons why you can't walk down to some technology place and buy that and put it on the FBI's equipment today. I understand that, but I'm saying, though, that is a tremendous weapon that will be, particularly with the information sharing to state and locals in the 600,000 locals.
I just want to be as candid as I can about this.
I do too.
This is an issue, and thank you for your candor. This is an issue which has been raised repeatedly by myself and others to the highest levels of this government, and still the answer is so unsatisfying. To be told that there is computer technology available in most computer stores across America that is not available in the premier law enforcement agency in America to search databases for names of dangerous would-be terrorists. And I won't dwell on it because it isn't your particular responsibility.
Well, I'm glad that you're frustrated by it, but from an operational standpoint, I'm doubly frustrated by that.
Well, let me ask you, if I can, let me just conclude by saying, I think it is fair to say that if you can't search for the information within your own agency.
Well, we can. We can search for our information.
We were told that word search in the FBI computer system requires 8 screens today. 8 screens before you can search.
I don't know who told you that, but if you're talking about being able to search ACS, we can do that. We have that capability, and we can link words up with that.
Well, I think
we don't have the ability for it to read all the documents and say 6'1" man, Abu, whatever, and the spelling of that, or John Smith in Birmingham, Alabama.
Or flight training school. If you're looking
we have some capability of word association now currently, but it's not where we need to be. We should be able to say flight training schools, and we should be able to say I-94s. I mean, you're right. We're talking about the same thing.
I'm not going to quarrel with that. Let me ask you then about questions raised by General Scowcroft and Mr. Berger about some of the priorities within the FBI in terms of what is viewed as good performance in the FBI and what is not. And I think those questions kind of go to some of the earlier observations you made as to whether or not, when it comes to evaluating the work of an FBI agencies, whether or not, as General Scowcroft told us, that the best FBI agents do criminal investigations, not terrorism. Was that a mindset, or is that a mindset within the agency today?
And he was basing that upon what?
Basing it on his experience.
I think you could draw that association 20 years ago. Counterterrorism work is extremely difficult. It is not easy. General criminal investigative work is a lot less, I need to probably be careful with my words here, is probably not easier. What's the word I'm looking for, Michael? Easier. Man, I talked around in a circle on that one. Is it somebody that culturally in the 1960s and 70s we hired people through the even into the 80s, to come into the FBI, and the image of that was chasing bank robbers in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, or solving a kidnapping, or working white-collar crime or whatever. Yeah, that's why we need to look at the skill sets of agents. I take exception to the fact that somebody says that the better agents are working criminal matters. Those are difficult cases. You have to be extremely organized, and you have to be, particularly in the counterterrorism and counterintelligence field, to outthink your opponent. And it's easy to react on criminal matters. Someone calls up, the bank's been robbed. Someone calls and says that somebody scammed me out of $100,000, as opposed to, where will al-Qaeda attack us next? I take exception to that statement, and I take exception with the understanding that he's probably looking years past. That's not the case. The men and women we have in the FBI working counterterrorism are the absolute best we have.
I think that's a very fair conclusion on your part, too, that it is more difficult to be analytical and perspective in terms of the threat than to deal with the specific crimes that have traditionally been assigned to the FBI. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.